Hi, I'm Colleen Harmeline from Florida State University. We're going to talk today about service marketing and the customer experience. And in today's day and age, the customer experience is more than just a touch point. It's a story that the marketer tells. And in this next few slides, I'm going to talk about how marketers have become the great storytellers of reality. You don't have to take my word for it. Seth Godin, one of the New York Times bestselling authors, states, "Marketing is no longer about the stuff that you make, but about the stories that you tell." The founder of Huffington Post states that people think in stories, not statistics, and marketers need to be the master storytellers. And then the founder of Mandalay Entertainment says that a great salesperson knows how to tell a story in which the product is the hero. And so for the last 10 years, the last decade of my life, I've studied how to craft these persuasive stories to increase click-throughs, to encourage health program adoptions, to spur donations or reacquire customers. And what I have found is that the most persuasive stories are the ones that reflect what make us deeply human. And so they develop characters that resonate with the customer and then present challenges that evoke social and basic human emotions. And they present a climax or a point at which the customers make a decision. And then in the resolution, they demonstrate the product benefits. And so what I've noticed over this decade of research is that these stories, which used to come from the firm in advertising and commercials, are now coming more and more from other consumers. And so friends, even the parasocial or AI developed friends who tell relatable and inspiring stories, they can demonstrate templates of how to validate and enhance the actual self, immersing products in these demonstrations so that these tutorials become wildly persuasive. Yet, the climate on these digital characters, these influencers and these other consumers, has radically changed over time as well. And so what used to be perceived as deeply authentic, depending on what features are available, we have detected that people do not believe them as much. And so if you'd like to read about either of these two studies, you can scan the QR codes embedded within this deck to pull up the full research study. We also have some research that examines what emotions these stories evoke. And so we see stories that evoke gratitude or love, and they can be profoundly influential. We'll get into a couple of these more deeply later in the slides. And we also have seen firms guide people through less helpful emotions, such as betrayal and fear. And one of the most important things we've noticed is that these stories can be so ingrained in the way that we perceive ourselves that they can help dictate what we feel makes us good or bad or right or wrong, or how we think others might view us based on what we think they believe is good or bad or right and wrong. And these moral frameworks are so powerful, yet often underlooked filters of consumption choices. So some of these stories dictate when we eat. So some might tell us to skip breakfast, while others will tell us that skipping breakfast is the healthiest thing you can do for your body. While others might dictate the type of lifestyle choices we make. So how much we work or don't work can often be influenced by the media and marketing discourse that's evolving in the culture around us. So there's a great paper in JCR that says just this, that busyness has become a sign of social status in conspicuous consumption. And so culminating all of this research, we've developed this process through which people take these narratives from the marketplace and use them to dictate what makes them feel good or bad or right and wrong about themselves through this process of moral introspection. And what we found after deep research of thousands of media posts and marketing posts, as well as in-depth interviews of consumers, was that people tend to use these 4 strategies to defend their moral position once they've selected the type of consumption they are going to pursue. And on the left-hand side, you'll see this strategy of denouncing, where someone can take a righteous stance and say that their consumption choice is the only valid choice and everyone else's is wrong. Or moving over to the right, you can do the exact opposite, which is ritualizing that consumption choice so that it's so deeply and personally meaningful that it makes you autonomous or sort of immune to the cultural pressures of what's good and bad or right and wrong. We did a similar study following people in their online dating journeys, and this was incredibly enlightening in that it showed us that the marketplace can often provide plots and props for the narratives that we tell ourselves about ourselves that we then use to determine the vulnerability necessary for consumption and whether it is worth the risk, and how this risk dictates how we curate what we share about ourselves and how we re-embody ourselves into the digital world to insulate from those potential threats. So these stories that were circulating, they came from diverse products, books, music, movies, but they also became these templates on where people would find the edge of their existence, the edge of their identities. And so they could exist in a space that was ordered, but were trying to reach out and become someone different as they looked for these romantic or even just interpersonal partners. And in that, we discovered these 4 different scripts that help to dictate whether or not they would estimate positive outcomes or negative outcomes in these potential marketplace-enabled encounters. And so we saw this romantic and heroic script where you can see this example at the bottom of the screen by Sarah. They're looking for this one true love, this soulmate, this sort of iconic or fairy tale type ending to these stories. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we saw many people share examples of fears of these similarly tiny probabilities of occurrences, but opposite outcomes. So the tragedy or the ironic myth, in which Dalton illustrates beautifully with this quote that says, there is a non-zero chance that the person on the other side of this digital encounter I'm experiencing is a serial killer. And so we see this struggle with these narratives trying to balance this very low but potential outcome of a extreme positive to an extreme negative, and then estimating how much that probability translates to their own personal existence, and then using these strategies to present the self in ways that give them an illusion of control. So these narratives are profound. And so marketers, and through all this research, what we found and discovered is that marketers supply a repository of possible selves, of supporting characters, of plot lines, of settings and resolutions that we can draw from in ways that can powerfully shape how we experience reality. So beyond just what we buy, to how reality is actually unfolding for us. And even more importantly, we show things that it's not just about the story, but that who the storyteller is matters. We saw this a little bit in the shift between the marketer and commercial and advertising to the consumer. But then we also see in research on stigma and people who are managing these highly vulnerable states that if someone is telling a story through a marketplace actor or a physician, then they're more likely to estimate risk or to allow risks to achieve the desirable outcome. Where if it comes from someone who's experiencing that same stigmatizing state, they'll be less likely to take those undesirable risks at hand. And so it made me question, what if these stories can do more than just persuade people to buy or donate? And so I went down this path to understand what marketing is to us and how it can shape reality. And I found these 2 studies, which I thought were incredibly enlightening. So we see more than 4,000 ads per day, with think 6,000 thoughts per day, which means marketers command an unmatched access to the human mind in ways that are more integrated into consumers every day than any other institution. We're meeting them in their realities, on their cell phones, and in their entertainment in ways that no other institution, the FDA, our government, our public service institutions, they're not gaining that kind of access. And if we're not careful, this can have dire consequences. And so we see this in doom scrolling, where we've shown that people are likely to look for negative narratives and to continually consume to a point of almost addictive states. So what I was asking myself was beyond just these psychological states, but what does this do to our actual physiology? So my biggest sign of inspiration was, how does the mind connect to medicine and healing? We know that fear can deter healing, and there's many medical studies that say this. So terrifying events can trigger things like PTSD. So we know the mind can make you sick. It's very difficult to heal from a fear state, and we see this in these coronary artery studies, where states of stress reduced outcomes so significantly that they now implement stress reduction protocols in these types of healing protocols. And also the correlation between high stress is so strong, something we don't see in many of the social sciences, but at the intersection of social science and medicine, there's this negative 42 correlation between stress states and beneficial healing outcomes. And this is invisible wound healing. Yet much of our storytelling and marketing of medicine is actually drawing on a fear state. So if fear can make you sick, then why can't the mind, and the mind can make you sick, then why can't the mind also make you well? And so there's these amazing studies in medicine that suggest exactly this. So there's studies trying to build muscle tone that show just the act of visualizing deeper muscle strength can evoke true connections from the brain to that muscle. So those contractions get stronger and you get actually physically stronger. There's also these unbelievable studies that I encourage you to go seek out and read yourself, where a placebo surgery performed the same as an actual surgery. And not just a minor surgery, but heart surgery. So in the placebo, they made an incision, but no internal surgeries. In the actual surgery, they had an open heart bypass surgery. And they experienced the same sorts of outcomes as the actual surgery. And even on a more subtle note, these stories, the character-driven stories we've been talking about, and the emotional content that they evoke, have been shown to consistently evoke oxytocin. Oxytocin is our chemical body. It's the language between our cells. And this one specifically is so interesting because it's been called the caring hormone or the moral molecule. And it's what underscores empathy in society. So oxytocin increases responses to public service announcements. It increases purchases that enhance caregiving capacity, but it also increases trust in other humans. And so if we can have this type of impact on the body, this profound impact on healing, this profound impact on society at large, then I think we have a responsibility to think about this customer experience more deeply than just how to get people to click and to buy. So I'm going to end on this quote that says the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda for an entire generation that is to come. This comes from one of the greatest storytellers, Steve Jobs, and one of the greatest marketers. And so if we are that great storyteller, then I think we have a responsibility to see if we can help use this storytelling to nurture a compassionate world. Thank you.